My name is Taran Matharu, and I'm the New York Times bestselling author of the Summoner series, the Contender series, and the Soulbound saga, book one of which, Dragon Rider, is out now. Today I'm going to talk to you about my 5 stages of creating a fantasy world. Writing in a fantasy world is no easy task. World building is tricky. Too much too soon and you're info dumping. Too little too late, and the reader will have very little idea of what the world looks like. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. Instead, I want to talk to you about designing the world in the first place, before you write the story. In fantasy, the world is often the first thing readers look at when deciding if it's a book they would like to read, so it's important to make it a good one. So step 1 is the premise. So let's say we're going to write about dragon riders versus necromancers, as an example for this video. So first you drill down into the simpler things. Is there a military element to the dragon riders? And if so, what's it like? How many dragon riders are there? Are necromancers born with the ability, or is it taught? So that is just simply asking basic questions around your initial premise. The second step is the wider world. So once you have the main stage set, you ask yourself, how does this affect the day-to-day of the wider world that you're writing? Are there dragon transports carrying goods back and forth? Do people no longer fear death, knowing they can return as the undead? Is this a medieval fantasy, or are there gunpowder weapons powerful enough to take down a dragon? These are things you need to explore before you begin writing. It will add detail and color to the world you build, and the story will be all the richer for it. The third step, again, is that it's almost an extension of step 2, and it's looking at the people. So step 3 is the people. Quite simply, a world is only as good as the people in it. It's somewhat of an extension of step 2 with more focus on the different groups who populate the world. Their history and their motivations can add a political element. Are undead slaves doing all the work, for example? Perhaps there are activists campaigning for undead rights. What are dragon riders like? Do other troops support them, or do they fight alone? Are there royal and noble families? Again, these questions will not only allow you to build a more coherent world, but also allows you to develop the characters that will feature in your book. Step 4 is the geography, and I'm sure many fantasy enthusiasts were wondering if this would come up. The fantasy map is always fun to design, but it also serves an important backdrop for your story. Is it a tropical paradise full of mountains for dragons to roost in? Or is it a flat wasteland perfect for roving hordes of zombies? The landscape the world takes place in is important. Although great swathes of purple prose or overly descriptive writing describing the landscape can be irritating and is no longer in vogue, although it certainly was about 100 years ago. So find the right balance and your work will perhaps take on a cinematic quality. Laying this all out early will help you when you're developing your world and the plot itself. So do the distances traveled, for example, have an impact like they do in Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones? Are some places impassable, like the Great Wall in the north of Game of Thrones, for example, requiring the hero to take a certain route? Think about how important geography is for Lord of the Rings and how far Frodo has to travel with the ring. Again, step 2 comes into play here. With zombies everywhere, you might have enormous walled cities, the last bastions for humanity's survival. Or maybe it's the dragons that are the real threat, scaring people into living in underground cities. And then finally, step 5, choosing what belongs and what doesn't. If you're anything like me, you'll have millions of ideas and they all won't fit into your story. So you should be ambitious, but also be realistic. And at the same time, try and remain flexible. If you're anything like me, you have too many ideas, but always be aware of one thing. Sometimes a world can be too complex and too creative. You'll find yourself bogged down in lengthy explanations or exploring some aspect of the world's intricacies that throws the plot off and doesn't really have much of a relevance to the story. So be wary of your book becoming an encyclopedic exploration of the world, sort of like a history book rather than a story. Finally, don't be afraid to adapt as you write. Maybe some aspect of the world doesn't fit, or you can't do it justice in the text you can spare to feature it in. Perhaps it has no relevance to the story, serving as a distraction rather than as a backdrop. So when writing, it's important to keep the core of the world first and filter in the rest when it feels natural. Your writer instincts might warn you that something isn't quite working. So listen to them when you hear them. So thanks very much for listening. I hope that was helpful. If you'd like to check out my books, check out Dragon Rider, which is on all bookshelves in Barnes & Noble right now, and in fact in all English-speaking countries in the world. So I hope that you give it a chance, and thanks for watching.